It's really simple stuff, but goodness gracious. What a mess. All right. Well, I guess I'm live, so pretty terrible. Sorry about that. I couldn't even be on for 10 minutes. Like 10 minutes, dude. And then it went off. It's a nightmare sometimes. We'll see. I can't promise, Jason. I know. This just that I really just wanted to knock this out. I thought we were going to get done before market closed, to be honest, but yeah, this thing is just garbage, so we'll see. I do appreciate that. I don't know what to tell you. I contacted them like 3 times about it. They don't fix it, so they think it's not their fault, or that if it's scheduled outages, they don't care. And they basically told me they're like constantly nursing an outage like every day. And I was like, what kind of reasoning is that? That's not an outage. That's like a infrastructure problem, you know? If you're having to go every single day, and I thought it was maintenance or something. This is different. It just cuts out completely all of a sudden, and then it has to take 5 minutes to reload. Anyways, so look, I've got AMC right here. It's upside down. And I'm going to make this as simple as I can make it. It's not Starling. It's something else. Optimum or something like that. They're just terrible, and I can't get anybody else. Starlink? Maybe I should do Starlink. I don't know. My wife doesn't like Elon Musk, but I don't really care if it works. We tried a internet once, but they like a satellite internet, it wouldn't connect, so I doubt it would work. Anyways, I'm gonna make this as simple as I can. So there's AMC upside down. All right. It looks very similar to what we see in AMC in 2020. Okay? That's beyond simplification, but it's there. It does look like it. Under normal circumstances, here's exactly how I would read this. All right. I said I'm going to keep this really simple, and I think it's appropriate. All right. Because if this were upside down land, it's easier to kind of say, oh, it's bearish, right? As opposed to saying, oh, it's bullish. This is how you would normally read this, right? You would look at this and you would say it's one of 2 things. It's only one of 2 things. Again, keep it simple, right? One, this is a rising triangle, okay? An ascending triangle is what the pattern might be called. Oh, she's in like the box growling at her brother. And it's not a perfect ascending triangle, but it's pretty dang close, right? It's pretty dang close to an ascending triangle. I mean, as close as you're going to get in this market, crazy market anyways, right? You'd say that's pretty darn close. Hey, get off. Get off of there. Sorry. So you'd say that's pretty darn close to an ascending triangle. That's one way to interpret this. If this is an ascending triangle, you couldn't use the top. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Although, I mean, I don't know how you could ignore it. But you could probably maybe more easily use something like that, which is probably the more realistic target anyways, like the 850 area. And you could do a measurement. And usually it's like, I want to say it's like a 30% to 40% breakout on that, which would go quite low if it went the other way. This is not going to surprise anybody here. I'm just telling you, like, this is a really simple way of understanding this. Well, again, assuming that it didn't use the tippy top, but instead used kind of this clustered area where it hit the most resistance right here and sold off, which was kind of right around that $7 to $8 region. You'd look at this and you'd say, all right, well, if it had a 40% breakout, then it would go to like 160. Okay? That's from like the breakout point. That sounds pretty familiar to a lot of people, and it does sound a lot like what we would expect if this is going to have a breakdown, right? Because most people are looking at this saying, well, if it goes and it cuts the price in half, then it should no longer be 360 average. It should be, you know, $1.80 average or something like that, right? With the dilution effort. Okay? We don't know if there's going to be a lifeline extended or not, but that's one way to look at this. All right, it's a quote-unquote ascending triangle. We would say descending triangle, right? And it's going to break down or something at some point and go pretty low to like $1.60, and that would be potentially like a spring. I mean, it's possible, but at least for now, it would just be like, no, it's just a breakdown, right? And in the midst of that, you could have, I guess, like a head fake one way or the other. Now, I've already talked about why I think that bears would be probably looking for some kind of a move the other way, but I'm not going to get into further details on that part, as I already did that in the last stream. We're moving really slow on my chart update, so apologies if it looks clunky. So that would be one way to look at it, okay? Easy enough. Another way to look at it would be as maybe as like a Wyckoffean person, that you would have essentially like a phase B kind of bottom in this range here. And I look at it to some degree this way because I think that when you go back and you look closely at what's happening, there's definitely like strength tests that are happening, and we have some that we've missed. Like we just don't have them, like they never happened. And it's essentially been doing a kind of parabolic move this direction, which is typically not in the favor of the direction it's going. Like this usually has to have some kind of a back test at some point here, and it hasn't, all right? Typically. Not always, but like typically. This is what we saw in 2020. If you were to flip the chart upside down, you would have seen that it was kind of like rolling up into a corner, and then all of a sudden it has these massive juts down, and then it just drops. But of course that was a huge run. The reason I'm bringing this up is because when I look at this stuff from like an iterative point of view, which is this idea that your operators are effectively doing the same thing over and over again, you certainly could look at it like this, where you have you know, certain cross downs that are backing up. Like this looks like a cross down that backs up, right? And then that's fine. It's made its advancement. That's where it hits the new high and then goes the other way. These certainly look like bearish advances, and they are. Again, this is an upside down chart. So you could look at that and say, yeah, that seems about right. And certainly it hasn't come back here in a long time. In 2020, the idea was there, and it was very clear that this particular or I would say angle, but really it's kind of a creek, it's kind of a trend. It may be more of like a Fibonacci wave that it's busting over here. This is kind of like a midway point right here, and it reflects as such because there's a gathered trading that's happening. Granted, in the upside down land, it doesn't look like much of anything except maybe an advancement with a backup to the creek. Well, that SOS with a backup to the creek in the upside right world is a UTAD. Stop it! You're about to go to the back. I'm sick of it. Knock it off. Don't look at him. Look at me. I'm gonna get rid of you, man. You're like the worst cat. All you do is start drama. What is... Oh my gosh. You just can't help yourself. Psycho, my other cat. She's been fighting with my other cat. She just will not stop. Like, at all. It's driving me nuts. Anyways, so this is something that we would look at and say, sure, if this were to drop here, you'd have, big, giant kitty cat ears. This would be a 4-top distribution, and you would dump. It's important that you recognize that that's what that is. When I say 4-top, I'm always thinking about an iteration that's kind of like failing to advance, because that's what happens. And this is never changed. When I started doing AMC charting back in 2021, it was like the first thing I noticed in that November was that it was essentially playing out like the whole thing was playing out. And I was like, that's weird, man. It's like the whole entire, we'll call it like a pattern, right? It's played out in this end here, meaning you see the same thing that you saw earlier. So this would be an iteration that's higher than the creek, but obviously it's setting up low. So naturally, like this crossing point right here, where it hit that resistance, would be like your main creek down. You could see that that's where that deep retracement comes from. And there's more to it than that, but that's certainly a possibility. You're talking about reverse split stuff. You're talking about, this giant dilution, okay? And all of that is true. That's certainly one way to look at it. But we also have to kind of recognize that, like, while that may be true, you could have said the same thing back in 2020. Like, it's the exact same. And I've been saying that for a little while, and I don't think you should take that for granted. I think it's just something that you keep in mind. Like, it does look bearish at times, this chart, and then it does look kind of bullish at times, but that's the way that it looked in 2020. It did. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just like scroll back. And before that final spring, the only real sign that you had that this was maybe not going to dump off the face of the earth was a bit of a sign of weakness on the part of bears, which was like this kind of push down here. We got something a little different because ours was like really early, like dropped really fast or went really fast in the beginning, and it stayed pretty elevated. But you can see right there that this resistance in the middle, this chop right here, right? It represents essentially like the exact same kind of midpoint arc here. And again, going into 2000 and like right there, going into the big jump, right, with the UT, all that stuff we just talked about on the previous creek jump or whatever, that's very similar, right? This is where the majority of the trading was happening and trying to push over something on the part of bears, right? So this is a short seller's point of view. And then they get this massive advancement to the top. And until that point, you're like, well, it doesn't look that bad. This could be some kind of a cup and handle, right? If you had like kind of inverted it, you'd be like, oh, it could be like a cup and handle. And the market took off right here in September. It went back over the March drop highs right there. But AMC goes this opposite direction. It doesn't look great. It looks kind of bleh. And you see the same thing play out right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, right there in the middle. It's just another iteration of like this top, but it's happening like low, and it's happening along this creek, and it just looks like it's not going to advance. Like, it doesn't have the markings that people would often look for, right, in an advancement. It just doesn't seem to want to jump the creek. It's just suppressing down. And again, invert the chart, and this is essentially like what we're saying, not exactly like 1-to-1, but it's very, very close. This motion right here, when it's finally like breaking out, right, it doesn't feel good. And again, back here, I think it would have been easy, and I do think this is easy to do. I think it would have been easy to look at something like this and to say, although it is a bit wider, to say it's also like a descending triangle, because that's what it looks like. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of look at that and say, yeah, it's kind of like burning up into that bottom. and it could break out and it could break down. Now we have a lot more information now than we did back then. These are pretty scant bottoms. Like there's not really much there. There's like a few, right? We've got a bunch of them in the local time frame. But even this, guys, like this looked like a breakout on the bear side. Did it go to where the target could have been? Again, if I'd looked at this and I thought this was some kind of and just using like the same method I just did, if I thought this is some kind of a breakdown that's going to happen, again, flipping the chart upside down just to help remove some bias here, I would look at this and suggest, all right, well, this should go 40%. And at the time, that would have dropped $1 probably, you know. And I don't want to say this is like foretelling the future, but maybe it was, right? Maybe the fact that it went the other way first, that meant that it was going to avoid at that time going from like 292 to like $1.50, just like we're trying to avoid going from 290 right now to $1.50. And then later on, like this is where we end up, right? You can see it right there. That's kind of weird, right? Well, maybe, or maybe that was just the way it was, you know? So is it going to go? Is it going to break out? Is it going to break down? I've already given you my opinion on it, and I think that that's as much as like I could give is my opinion. I think that when you look at this and you say, well, it'd go either way, that's not really helpful, Booksy. I know, but at the end of the day, like, there's not much else here except an opinion because, yeah, like this could break out and go there. And I think the whole time we've been waiting, I've been like, yeah, it could definitely just, or it could go to 240, which is what we identified as the spring bottom. Remember, we were saying like, well, it could go drop beneath just 245, just a little bit, and they'd be fine. That, to me, I've been calling that and saying that there's a few options here for a spring. One is really, really small. We're going to see if that plays out. It's basically like 270-ish, 275. The other is 265 because that's that low right here, 264. And then the next one is 246. Any of those could act as an appropriate spring. But if this were to drop like it did in 2000, you might see it go to like 237. If it were to be like kind of 1-to-1 with what you saw in 2020, that would be correct. There's a little head fake on the bear side after this triangle looks like it's going to break out. Then it just reverses, and where does it go? Goes to that mark right there, which is around like $10. And granted, if it did it very soon instead of later, it might not be that high. You know, who knows? If it did it before earnings, it'd be $9. These numbers are not astronomically high like some people want you to believe, because if you look at the disparity here, like look how long it's traded in this top range and how long it's gone without back testing this trend that was developed. This has been a long time. There's definitely no question in my brain that there's adequate cause built up to have this kind of a move. And I look back at 2020 and I'm like, guys, there wasn't a fundamental reason. People really want there to be like fundamental reasons, or they're trying to find like what was the specific catalyst. It probably was GME. I mean, but at the same time, is it there technically? Yeah, I mean, same deal. It had avoided going back to this region. There was a pretty huge gap, right? And then going back and looking at where this ended up, this ends up back testing this like, I really think it's really an LSPY. It's a bear flag, and there's a couple of them right here. That's the reason that it ends up going back down through, which, again, this is an upside-down version of AMC. This is not at all unrealistic for us looking at this and suggesting that that could happen. I don't think it's a big leap. I really don't. I think the problem is that you have bears that have like a really good case right now for downside, that we should be down there because of valuation. We should be down there because of share offerings, right? So here's one. This is one of the flags right here. This was kind of a repeat flag that goes down to recheck this. It's similar to the second one if you go back to 2020. But that is very close to the same in terms of proportion. If you look back here, this guy ends up being where the top is. This was the back test, for lack of a better understanding. This one and this one were kind of the main back test of this range here. This had already, I think, clearly done a creek jump right there. You can see it visually. It had jumped the creek, and then it jumps again, and then it moves. But these were your main levels, right, of contention back in that time period. And this is ultimately where it goes. And it was built in, I think, to the imbalance that's present right here. When this, again, takes off and fails to go any further, all of a sudden you have to make up all this space and there's no time and it just goes crazy, right? And there's even like indication here that there's sort of a drag down approach that's about to happen. Granted, we know that this was actually bullish, right? But it helps to kind of see it as like a falling thing, like back to a support level, because that's how bears would see it. And that's like a 50% right here. That middle one, that's the 50% marker from bottom to top. So what's the problem with this? Well, there's not really like a huge problem except for the fact that there's the chart shift. So again, I'm looking at this like extremely simplistically, and I'm saying that like, look, I totally agree that maybe this is going to become a beyond meat situation where this drops ridiculously far. It doesn't have to necessarily have some massive advancement in order to achieve that. They could drive the price to like 4. They could drive the price. We talked about this last time because these iterations open the doors for those prices. One would be right here at 4. The next would be right here at 8 or 9. And then the final one is quite high, you know. But I mean, any of those might be enough for an operator potentially. And when I look back at this chart shift idea, one thing that I always think about is like, well, while this is true, like I think it's true in terms of like valuation. In terms of levels, the better practice would be to try to place this according to where we think those levels are locally. And that would be like looking at the relative ratio here to here. It would be this guy. And I think I've drawn this before, but if I haven't, it actually catches really well. So like relative to itself, the way the chart is right now, that would be right here. And this is nothing particularly new if you've been following the channel for a while. But one thing you might find interesting is that trend matches that trend from way back. And ultimately right here, this is kind of what we're talking about. We talk about like jumping creeks and all this junk and like where are those levels actually at? I think the reason that it is where it is right here is because it's basically a back test. Like the $13 and $14 area, and I argued this when it came down, or I should say up the first time, was it didn't go far enough. I mean, it looks like it went right to the door, but I was like, it didn't really go to that actual drop. So the drop ledge was like a little bit higher, and at the time I was like, it should have at least been like up to 14, maybe even a little bit higher than that. But that's because back then this was like right here, and now it's definitely higher. Like it's not where it was before. Right here it was like, why didn't it go all the way up? I don't know, it just didn't. Well, you didn't even think about the chart shift then. No, I didn't. And that's the weird thing is like, even back then I kind of knew that something was off, and it had to do with that where that gap was and what I thought was like the perceived gap. So anywho, the point is like this would be the area that has distinctive imbalances, but, and you can see it in the chart, I don't think this is very complex. There's only a couple different possibilities here for like where this resistance is. And one is already kind of shown, and then the other is this little shoulder. This is more or less how I drew the one in 2020. If you go back and you look at the one in 2020. I'm not trying to repeat myself all over again. I'm just getting to a point. I'm going to skip over to GME. And this is kind of how I drew it here. You can see there's a little bit of a move up. It's a little confusing in 2020 because there's actually 2 more lows after the first major low. So they actually don't adhere to and then the gap is like way up here. Whereas in current time, it kind of settled up. All of that's noise in current times is a little higher up. This isn't like that. So you can see back here, you know, maybe there is a little bit of me that's a little bit crazy and I'm just seeing things, but this to me looks pretty much identical. Like this looks like the same advancement. There's a push against resistance, goes down low, quote unquote. That's your major LSPY, and then it advances the other way. And of course, we're talking about going down, not up there. That to me looks essentially identical to what we experienced. But for the angle, and I've mentioned this before, and I've said that I don't think that the angle on, it's just really moving slow here, does not want to move. I don't think that the angle on the ascending portion of this is actually the same. I can't get this thing to move. I'll stop using the mouse for a second. I don't think it's the same. I think it's a weaker angle. But if I were to use like a very similar build out, like there it is, there's the advancement, and then it drops, and then it advances the other way. And I'll make this like a pink line so it matches. I don't see it as exactly the same. Now you could say, well, that's still really high, but it's not in some ways, because it's also like, that's like $14. Yeah, it's high, but when you look at the division of levels here, logically, it kind of makes sense that could also be like a duplicated spot. So instead of having, meaning like it's the second half, I'm sorry, not duplicated. Instead of having a single move that goes to like 1360 or 14 or something, I've talked about this quite a bit. Like it certainly seems very logical that you could have the second move set up here, and then the final move is really a 50-50 to that last bit. And there's other reasons for that, but this angle is very much not as steep. Like it's not even remotely the same. It's like a half the steepness. And I think there's a reason. I think it's because the fact is we don't really need to go as high in this current area. So this to me would be like that same bleed out. So what does that make this, right? If it does do something like that? Well, like I said, this would be like a UTAD of sorts, where you've had like a massive buying climax, and then there's a distribution, and then they bring it back up, quote unquote, right? And in this case, it's shorts bring it back down to accumulate and also load up to go the other way. But they're going to use a head fake on the shorts. If this were bulls, we would just be saying, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, it peaked a little bit over this top and then reversed. Yeah, that would make sense. Sure. What's interesting is that when you flip the chart, I don't find it to be very controversial. I find it to just be like, okay, this actually makes more sense to us because we're so used to things going down on AMC that we've gotten particularly used to seeing this like double cat ear, right, on the bear side, or excuse me, on the bull side on the top. But when you flip the chart and you see it, it's there, it's potentially there on the bottom. That's why I've been saying, like, really don't need to see it go beyond 246. I mean, it could, just on the idea that maybe there was a desire of at some point in the future to go down to $1. Well, then, yeah, you might see it go really low. But they're going to go offload, I think, first. So the way I would look at this is a series of iterations that are basically building out. And there's a couple things that, you know, are worth noting. But ultimately, like, this is kind of just slow rolling it. And the reason I wanted to show this first is because, like, yeah, like I can see the bear case for going low, but it certainly looks just like 2020. And that bear case was there as well to go to like $1 or something. It just would have been there. Because if you're charting it and you're doing it reasonably, that's exactly what you would see. It's the same exact setup, essentially. What I see is as iterative motion. Like I see this right here, this push up here, this push down here. I see these as cell tests, right? And I've talked about this before at length, but this being like a macro cell test, a smaller cell test, a smaller cell test, a smaller cell test. I don't see this as particularly controversial either. I think it's saying it's a cell test, well, that's duh, it's going down, right? But what I am saying is I think it's iterative, meaning that there's a particular pattern here that's playing out. And you're seeing that iteration kind of play out vertically up and down, right? And horizontally across time. And that's all there is to it. So like this is a jump of the creek, right? And so if you take it like that as like an inversion, and I'm going to put this back on here now just to show you. So these are strength tests. Then this is pretty much all there is to it. This is going to keep iterating until it doesn't, one way or the other. And you've boxed yourself into a corner, and the operator just keeps hitting the replay button effectively. Where we are right now, I've kind of hypothesized in my brain that it's essentially like the same place that we were around the 11th, meaning that there's already been an early advancement. It happened right here on September 26th. So I've marked it off on the other chart, but this right here was like the earlier low, the earlier advance, and then it backs up again. And then this is the earlier advance, and then it backs up again. And then it goes above. And that's the way I've been looking at this, is like, all right, I see this as this is the most likely place where you have a like an iteration forming. So where would we be in the scheme of all these things, right? If this is a micro iteration of a micro iteration of a micro iteration, where would it go? Well, right here you can kind of tell. Once this builds out over the top, it anchors itself, and then it pushes out. And in this case, it just doesn't make a lower low. And that's what we've been seeing, because it did the same thing here. It didn't actually go below the floor. It's just been making higher lows. So there's not really like a perfect method for measuring this. But one thing you could do is kind of just look relative to itself, like where did it go back to? And relative to itself, this went back to kind of the first drop ledge here, right? So where would the next one be? Well, again, relative to itself, without knowing exactly what's going to happen, you just kind of look at this and say, all right, well, this dropped here, you can see the weakness, and then it comes back up. That's just like a UT, right? Or not even a UT. I would say like a hook is what I usually call it. It's like a little S-curve hook. This guy right here, it's an LSPY. Where did that happen here? Probably right there, roughly. There's a tiny little ledge right here, and then there's another one there. So that's 273 to 275. So the reason I mention that is because this is the section of setup here where it's like, when does it stop? In theory, you could say, well, it doesn't stop ever. It just does this again going into November, and then it does it again going over here, and then it is again going over here. We all know that by December, if it hasn't already gone, we're at a troubled spot, because if it doesn't go before then you're basically just chopping right here. You're essentially going sideways until December. And I mentioned in one of the Discord group chats that if it didn't go now, like right here into August 20th to the 31st, I don't see it going randomly in November. I mean, I guess there's a catalyst there, but for earnings, maybe something else. But I was like, at that point, who knows? Like, this is kind of the last window that I can see as reasonable. Because once it gets this small, you're kind of left wondering, like, what the heck is going to happen? And it's already had elevated volume, like extremely high volume relative to itself, right, in this region, in this little pocket. It's already doing iteration cramping. It's not proportional anymore. It's like smaller than it should be kind of thing. It's not disproportional. It's just not like linear. I should just say it that way. So there's really no way of, beyond about the 15th of October going into maybe the 30th, there's really no way to know. Like, it's already too small is what I'm trying to say. If it shrunk again, it would be like tiny. So it just leaves me with kind of holding the bag, wondering, well, like how much further is it going to go, you know? And you can just tell, like, those are your levels of iteration. Like, they're doing the same thing over and over again. At some point, you're like, well, is it ever going to stop? Yeah, it should, because there is a method to the madness, and there's a reason you would do this. The reason being, don't do this indefinitely right here for no reason. You're either accumulating to go up or down. So there's no sense in like wondering if it's just going to keep going sideways forever. That's pointless. Like, it's not going to keep going sideways forever. That's not going to happen. You guys are like, yeah, it is, Booksy. It's been 2 years. 2 years is a long time for a cause to be built up for an operator. That's usually about as long as it goes. We've seen stuff go way longer, but it's pretty unusual. Like, and usually, like, the example I always think of is Tesla, which went sideways forever, but then it has this massive move, right? And it just never comes back. So it's kind of like, I don't think this is Tesla, right? I also see this as like, it's got a timeline in it, built into it. You can see the bouncing, and you can see the creeks are actually getting steeper and steeper. And we changed character last time. So I mentioned this previously, but right here, we actually changed character. The second push-up, which is a high volume, both of these are high volume. The second push-up, again, look at where this falls. Remember, these are the two main push-ups right there. The second push-up actually did come higher. And I went back and looked, because I was like, well, that's interesting. That's different, right? That's a change. What does that mean? Well, it didn't come above this kind of higher creek. I think on the macro, when you look at the trend down, it did come above the trend on the higher trend down. But what specifically stands out is this second peak, which did change character. It did go higher when it pushed up to 316 here. It marks off that 318 level, which is the same level that we did brace against in a bullish manner back here on the breakout. So it's a back test on this really important pivotal level. But locally, is it a creek break? And the answer is yeah, like absolutely it is. So this one is different because the second motion doesn't shy from the creek. In all the previous examples, the second motion doesn't come above. It sometimes doesn't even really get that close to it. It just sort of leaves it unchecked. This is one of the only, if not the only time, at least in the past that we can see, ever since we first came down, that this did this. So to me, it's like a definitive moment of strength testing. It really is. It seems like an insignificant thing. I get that, but I actually think it's very significant, like that this came back above. Because it didn't have to. It could have stopped here and dropped down again. Instead, there's a massive push to the upside. And I told everybody in chat that that wasn't exactly ideal at that moment, because you're like, yeah, I don't think it's just going to go. It hasn't done the low test. So it tested high. Now you've got another iteration forming potential drop, just like this one did. You can see it's almost exactly the same level. That's another change of character. The fact that this dropped down lower isn't that significant when you see that that actually happened the same way before. There's not really anything significant there. There is a significance in the higher push right before it, but if you look at just these two, that's pretty much exactly the same. So this drop being almost exactly the same is significant. It is important. The previous drop was up here around $3. So the fact that we're kind of consolidating around 382 tells me they've already, I think the operators have obviously, and you can tell just we're going sideways here for a while, but they've obviously found the level that they want to anchor on. So currently that previous drop was right there at, really right where we are, at like 282. I mean, I wish I could make it a little more dynamic, but it actually is kind of right where it ended up today. So right there. Alexa, turn off the timer. So we're really just setting up on the same marker again after a cell test. This is the push with the double cat ears. This is a push with a double cat ears. I thought it was pretty interesting because locally this also made a second high here, whereas this one is all downward. This one actually goes up twice. Same deal. I think it passed above, kind of like what happened right here. You can see that like there's a back test. I'll show you real quick. You see how this back test came down back through this moving average? This is a 4-hour 180-degree average that you see, the pink marker. See how it came down and then it goes back up to distribute over top of it again, right? The same thing happened here, but I thought it was kind of curious because it does it like in a triple motion. There's a 1, 2, and then a 3 motion. So volatility is definitely there. There's a highly compressed nature to it. But you can see it's the same, effectively the same motion, but it has a second higher top again, which I thought was curious. I was like, all right, well, that second top advancing is actually really good because what we want to see in a spring is that we want to see that it makes an auto reaction and then a phase B top that's higher. And then if it needs to come down and do a spring, it can create a phase B bottom and a spring. That doesn't matter. And even there, that spring could have a spring. You guys are like, this is dumb. I know, but it is what it is. The idea is that you want the phase B top to be advancing, not retreating, ideally in these setups. Eventually, this is going to stop doing that, right? It's no longer going to make a lower low, and you're going to see a big major creek jump, and that's where it's going to be like, oh, it's done, right? This is what happened in 2024's run-up, pretty much exactly. But this is actually what we want to see. Another thing that's really important is that in 2024, there is an advancement of the creek right before it drops down into the lower portions. And we're really quick to kind of point to negative examples. I said I was going to keep it short. It's not really been that short. We're kind of quick to point to negative examples of this, I think. But if you look at this, and I'm going to ignore this spike here in extended trading hours. That's cheating, Booksy. I know. But in this case, it doesn't actually exist in regular trading hours. And maybe what I'll do is just show you guys with the regular trading hours on. I don't want to confuse you. The point is that it's clearly staged for the market to participate in, and that's what matters to me. And that's right here. So there's actually an advancement over the creek early on. So during the second iteration, so this would be the first buy up, this would be the second buy up. Notice the pattern here. The first buy up has the lower second top, and then it drops through that rising level. There's really two drops to speak of. There's the first drop, which is the main trend, and then there's the second drop, which is kind of like the secondary support that happened right after the weakness. That doesn't happen here, though. There's a first drop, and it does break down through the primary trend. There's no question about it. It's right here. It drops to 303. The trend would have had support at 324. Then the second push, not too unlike the first, but in this case different because it goes over the top. So it goes ahead and does the strength test early. Some of you guys are looking back like, oh, it's just gap filling or something. That doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what was opposite of that. I get that there's something over there. That's a given. The point is that it advanced what was established as a creek. Like this is where you had resistance. It hit 3 times, and then on this fourth, it actually pushes, but it doesn't run. And then it goes down, and you get this choppity chop motion here. There's a lot going on here. And like the previous, it kind of drops off at the same level if you look at where this is. And then it drops down, and in this case, it iterates again. This is where you get the 1, 2, 3, 4. That's actually kind of bullish looking, and that's where the buy-in was. And it doesn't look particularly fancy. If you look at the 4-hour moving averages and stuff like that, it looks kind of meh. Like it dropped beneath the, moving average on RSI. It went lower. It doesn't, I guess it could have been a hidden divergence on the 4-hour here. Doesn't even have much of a spring. It didn't go below that previous bottom, which in our case would be like the 246 potentially, or maybe the 270. Instead, it just goes below this rising trend and just barely. It's like a penny below. I can't even draw it on this chart. I know it's there because I've charted it before, but it just barely dips below it. But this was like the last major iteration right here, and then it drops. It's an accumulation pattern there, okay? And it looked really good. At the time, I was like, that looks really good. I can't say that this looks exactly the same. It's pretty darn close. Like, it's pretty darn close. It's just way bigger, right? It's just way bigger. You see the first push up right here, the second top. This one's not even like a close call. I mean, there's no way to draw these two tops in regular trading hours and not have that almost, you can see it advances like twice there. It's like pushing up against it. So it's absolutely like tried to advance this creek. And I'm being kind of, you know, I'm using that extended hours move right here to help frame it this way. This is a little bit more tied to like that macro anyways. So this is an appropriate place, even though it doesn't touch here. So you see what I'm saying? There's an early advancement on the fourth hit, 1, 2, 3, and then the fourth hit, it actually advances, but this is just way bigger. So I don't know what else to say other than like, well, that makes sense. And then the iterations are breaking down. You basically have the same exact spot. What's missing is the drop into the lower range. I mean, you don't have any drop here yet. There's no clear-cut answer if it's going to go just to here, if it's going to go down to 246. It's just not really clear. Like, you can't really tell. I could guess based on a couple things, but all I can say right now is this rounding motion right here. You can see it in the hole, right? Rounding. It's actually doing that even smaller right now. And if you get to the nitty gritty, it's almost like pointless. I don't really want to address it too much, but if you get to the nitty gritty of this, you can see the barcoding setting in here to some degree. Honestly, this doesn't even look that bad. This looks like it could be done. This looks like it could be going tomorrow for all I could tell. Because it's doing the same. It's like, this is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's already doing something kind of different. Right? So like, this is the big picture. You guys are like, this is going to go tomorrow? No, I'm saying like, it's gotten to the point where it feels like it could, because there's not really a lot of distinction here. Right? You're starting to see that pretty much every move here is causing a second motion that goes higher. And that's where it's starting to get like, oh, well, we may already be in like that muddled in between. This could be like a thought of as a nasty kind of a cat ear. But remember, again, just like this one could be, they are crossing down. Like, that's what the whole point of this is. And I'm left in this kind of squishy middle where I think on like the big picture, to me, I was saying it looked like it was, back in the drop down. It looked like it was still in the sell test phase. Like, it could be missing a whole other iteration below. I think the other booksy in me could make an argument that it's already doing that, because the other booksy in me could look at this and say, I think it's already doing it right now. Like, that could be it right there. Why not? I mean, it is a rising creek, and it is breaking through it. So is it possible that... Sure, like, it's possible. You could see that right there. So tell me, Booksy, is this possibly the spring? Yeah, it's possible. I'm doubtful that it is, for other reasons, because again, I think on the bigger picture you don't see that. You don't see it finishing yet, but on the smaller picture, if you showed me this and you said, is this possibly the end? I have no problem saying that. Yeah, it looks like it could be, because that's exactly what you want to see at the end. Like, it's no different than what we just diagrammed a minute ago. The problem is like, yeah, another person's going to look at this and say, well, it's a head and shoulder. It still needs to drop down to here. And then if you look at the bigger picture, it's kind of like, did it actually, go low enough? Well, no, we were saying on the big picture, it looked like it could go down to 246. So yeah, on the one hand, I'm like, maybe we're still in sell test mode and we're going down into our sell test right now. And we haven't actually finished the sell test, in which case we need to see this kind of motion. And then we're going to build a whole nother iteration right here. This is the one that you'd want to see, like this one, not too different. You'd want to see that. But I got to be honest, at this point, I think it looks different enough from 2020 in some regards that you kind of just have to take it for what it's doing. Like, it's pretty clear that this is some kind of a weird head and shoulder type iteration. It's not that different from what we see in 2020 in that this is the mode. This is what you see in 2020. When you go back and you just stare at it for a minute, this is all you see, right? There's just kind of like small M shape, big M shape, small M shape at the bottom. Certainly, this is a creek jump, early creek jump. This is a major setup, and then this is a final before the final creek jump. This is a more localized one that's more of a phase B bottom. So what I'm saying is that like this initial one was where it jumps over the downtrend. There's a big reaction, auto reaction, right? There's a phase B top, phase B bottom, and then the final one is really more about pushing that resistance, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, right here, right? That's where you want to see the resistance is pushed ever so slightly, you know, on like maybe a more major creek body. And I would say that's fair. So like, is this like a big arcing kind of thing that looks like a head and shoulder? Nah, I mean, no, like not traditionally. We wouldn't say it was a head and shoulder, but like, sure, there are shoulders and a head. I mean, it doesn't look like the classic one you see in textbooks examples, but it's got the motion there. So if that were the case, wouldn't this be it right here, the cross of the creek? Yeah, that is the M cross right there of this creek coming down. There's no question about that. That's the breakout. And then you get this big buy-in. That's happened before. That happened when we moved to $4. That happened when we moved to $13, right? That's it right there. It had to jump and then it goes. Easy enough to spot it. So this would be like your head motion right here. And then it's setting up low, as you can tell. And again, I'm not saying it's one-to-one, and I don't think you should say it's one-to-one. This is effectively just another iteration. It's a different way to look at the same exact information that we were just talking about. So this could be considered a phase B bottom right here at 279. Wait, what? Yeah. And that's what I've been trying to like kind of say to people who are really, really hell-bent on this idea that they're going to get a buy-in at like $2, or they're going to get a buy-in at like 180, or they're going to get a buy-in below the floor. And I'm like, look, I can appreciate that on the big picture, it certainly would seem like that is a reasonable thing to expect. Because on the big picture, I could definitely see why it would need, if you think it's going to do like 2020, and we just did it, right? That it would dip below this 237 or whatever down there. And that's where it would sort of end up. But the truth is that no one, whether it's me or your grandma, could look at this and say with absolute certainty that it definitely needs to go that low. There's just no way to do it. Like, it's not possible. If this is a phase B bottom, and it is a phase B bottom, if this is a phase B bottom, it is possible that this is also a phase B bottom right here. It doesn't mean it has to hold as the bottom for support, not yet. We might just be doing an up thrust and get a real phase B bottom. That's kind of what happened back here. I noticed that Stockfather changed his opinion because he had said he thought this was the strength test. Then it dropped low, and then he said, no, this is the phase B. But he had switched it. That's the same thing we could expect to see here if we're wrong, quote unquote, because I'm leaving that as a possibility, that this is really like the push-up. It's not actually like the entirety of it. I mean, it's super congested here, and it's already broken down. So part of me is like, isn't it already in that motion? Yeah, it is. Like, it totally is. There's no way to draw it where it's not, because that's the trend right there on that bust and that break back up. That's it right there. It's definitely below that, just like it came below here. Maybe we're going to have a free fall tomorrow and it's really going to make some traction, but that's where it ended up. You know, for whatever reason, we're just not iterating lower lows yet. We're not iterating lower phase Bs yet. Every single one of these phase B bottoms in these iterative motions has been higher. So there's three here now in my mind. There's the one down here at 246, which may not show up on the chart right now. I don't know. It's like loading or something. There's one right here at 265. So you see the dilemma. It's kind of like, it's not a grab bag, but it's sort of like, yeah, I could see how an operator could technically use any one of those. And what's fascinating about this example right here is it does look pretty darn similar to 2020, but it also looks very similar to 2024 bottom. And in the 2024 bottom, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, we did not drop to the first low. We only dropped like that local one, basically. So right now, the question mark in my brain isn't so much like, can I track this? I don't really care. I'm really just looking at where these are pushing and making new lows. That's a strength test period, right? Strength test, strength test, strength test, strength test. I can track it without, it's like breathing at this point. It's almost too easy, but it's like, that's not really the question in my mind. Can I track it? Yeah, I can track it, but the question is like, where the heck is it going to finally just make this friggin' drop and or reverse? It has to make a decision at some point. It can't just keep going indefinitely because it's getting to a point where it's almost ridiculously small. And you can tell because of how clustered this volume is starting to get to each other. It's like these two are so darn tight. You see these three peaks, 1, 2, 3, and you look here at 1, 2, 3, they're all like super tight together. Like, yeah, you could do it again, like maybe one more time, but based on that size differential, that's a huge difference in spacing, like humongous. We're talking about like a third of the size, maybe a third of the size. Yeah, like about a third. So let me ask that question. Like, even if it were like proportional, right? And maybe more like a fourth. Who knows? We'll just say a third because that's more than a fourth. We'll just let it be like bigger, right? If you were to take that same thing and to like apply it to what we're currently seeing, you would expect it to be like this big. That's tiny. That's like nothing. So like, let's say, for example, all right, maybe it does iterate again and it drops down. Well, how much space does that give us? Maybe till Friday the 24th. Do you see the problem? Like, it's gone to this place where it's like, it's absurdly, clownishly small. Like a clown car, right? You could make an argument it's going to just keep doing this iteration indefinitely, but really it's shrinking too fast. And I think that that's very important. So like, my question isn't, can't we track it? My question is like, where is the actual buy-in, right? Are we going to visibly see it? Is it going to be really obvious? Or are we just going to wake up one day? Because it was pretty obvious in 2024. I'm not going to lie. It got super small, and then it had this tiny little weak drop beneath this trend, and I was like, it's going to go, you know? Because you could see them. But here it's not really that clear. Each of these is kind of building out higher. Look at this. Look at the last two marks here. Just look at it. Don't blink, or you'll miss it. Did we just have it? What is the strength test then? Is that it right there? You guys are like, no, it's not possible. That can't possibly be it. Look, it's easy to say no because AMC's been saying no for a year. But this is exactly what we saw in 2024. It was like a penny below, not even. It was fractional. I see what you're saying, but I'm not going to look at Bitcoin right now. I can't look at that right now. I'm not going to be able to do that because I'm going to jump over to GME in just a second. But this is like a fractional moment of time, right? So I'm like, yeah, it could totally be like right this second. My point is that when you look at the actual motion here, we're just consistently pushing over the previous tops. It's definitely doing the head and shoulder things. I saw what you were saying about Bitcoin. I think it's interesting, but I can't confirm or deny that. And I'm not going to be able to do an inverse Bitcoin chart kind of thing right now. Well, what if it's not that? Okay, if it's not that bottom, then this is pretty easy still. I was saying a minute ago, I don't think it's unreasonable. It could just go to like 279. I said it in the Discord as well. Like, it's kind of odd because it doesn't seem like that would be low enough, but if it reversed here, I would look back and say that that iteration was tiny and it just did a little local spring, and it would be totally sensible. If on the other hand, I'm wrong about this being the phase B bottom and it still is doing this sell test like it was here, and we're just a little bit early, then it's possible there's a second low here that I haven't accounted for, right? And that's the one that would be like the actual low. How would you know? This is where things get really, it's so granular that I'm kind of counting on the fact, more often than not, I'm actually counting on the fact that I'm probably wrong, like that maybe this is just the sell test and it hasn't actually dropped, but the trend is there, and it definitely dropped the trend like it did here. So I'm kind of left like scratching my head. Like, I don't know. On one time frame, it looks fine. It looks like it's like here, it looks like it already dropped. On the other one, it's kind of like, it doesn't really look like it dropped yet. And it won't be possible for me as a human being to get it perfect, probably. Because the thing is like the moment that it doesn't drop, that's going to be the change of character, and we're going to be waiting for the drop. Does that make sense? So it's like, you're going to be like, where is the drop? The drop hasn't happened yet, Booksy. But that's exactly what's going to happen at the end, because it's going to be like this tiny little strength test, and then it's going to reverse. So it kind of makes it, I don't want to say pointless, but it does make it seem like, yeah, it'd pretty much be impossible to know exactly. But I think that you're in the final stages here. There's not really a lot of room to go in terms of timing. Vertically and spaciously, it looks like there's a lot. But I think when you look at the actual iteration here, this is really small compared to the previous, like super small. So if it is indeed done here, and these are the 1, 2, 3 like that we got here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, if you will, then we're basically finished with that one. We have one more potentially, and that really couldn't last, at least proportionally, it couldn't last past Friday. We're talking about October 24th, and Monday going into the next week would be going into the 30th, and that's kind of the end of the window. When I look at GME, I've been really doing some different stuff on GME because I thought about it and I thought, well, I should try to find the iterations on GME. And I did. And I was like, I really haven't tried beyond here to find like the outworking iterations, because if AMC is still iterating, why would GME not be iterating, right? Shouldn't it still be going? And it is. I think that this motion here is a four top as far as I can tell. There's 4 distinct motions, especially if you look at like the MACD indicator right here. There's like a 1, 2, and then it jumps 3, 4, and 4 is like this major push. You see the same thing here, 1, 2, 3, and then 4. I use that as a guide to just sort of help me to see it, but you can definitely tell it's there. This isn't important because it didn't advance the creek. It refused to go above. And I don't know if I should blame the warrants or if I should just blame whatever. Maybe there's nothing to blame. Maybe it's going to go low for a spring, unlike it did this last time. We didn't go super, super low. It went decently low. But it didn't go like as low as it could have gone. So it's possible this could be dropping to $18 or $17. But then I went and I compared it to what we saw on the micro it's very similar. This setup right here, and I'll try my best to see if I can find it really quick, because I don't want to waste any more of your time today. Hopefully this isn't a waste of time, but I don't want people to feel like I'm wasting time on purpose. I can waste time on accident, that's fine, but not on purpose. So this motion right here, let me see if I can pull it up. I'm not seeing it. Well, that's unfortunate because I see the comparison, but I don't see the original. And I crushed that AMD trade. I was so excited about that. All right, well, I don't know where it is, but this is the comparison I did. So unfortunately, it's completely redundant. I wanted to just get the bottom, but I can't get it. So this is the comparison I did. This is a very, very similar. You can't tell, again, because I don't have the full comparison up. And I don't know where it is, so I have no idea. It should have been right beside it, but it wasn't. This is important because this actually does go low right here, breaks the creek, and then it comes higher up, but it doesn't advance the parallel structure that's present. And this was back in 2024. So if you're looking at this screenshot that I have on the screen, this is the 2024 bottom. It's very small by comparison, just like the one we're talking about on AMC versus the bigger one. But this is essentially the same thing. And the RSI and the MACD look very, very similar. There's a long-standing, especially on the MACD, there's like a long-standing kind of, when you go to like the 4-hour, which is what this was done on, there's like a long-standing upward momentum on MACD here. The same thing applied on the 4-hour these are both 4-hour charts in May 2024. It didn't actually cross up and become green on the 4-hour until this move kind of crosses up in the end. So there's a cross, on the MACD here, but then it doesn't turn green until it kind of crosses up this way. You can kind of see it there, and then it really goes, right? Anyways, the point being, this was a test on the top. It made a higher high. That's important because it drops down, it makes a lower low, it tests that level. And by the way, you see that pink line here that I've got drawn on the chart? In 2024, that line goes all the way back to the original 2020 run-up. It's very much tied to all these bottoms, or potential bottoms, since we haven't actually finished yet here. This is the same motion, but notice that we didn't actually get to it. We left a gap, and instead the gap is like running us back down into, because we had to come back locally to fill that gap here, we're actually running back down to where that creek is, and right at that kind of the head where we're at right now, that's really where that creek is and the intersection. In 2024, we had already hit it, and when we advance, we just barely come back, and we check that creek bottom. This is effectively like the same wave motion, though. This makes a higher high, and then it drops pretty far. This is a deep advance, or a deep retracement, maybe like a 786 to 854 retracement on the whole move. If you look at that whole move, probably about 786. This is obviously looking a lot deeper by compared to the whole move. It almost looks like a full throwback at this point. But I was making a point that, like, that's probably, if it holds, it's the same general setup. It's just huge. It's like way bigger. Look at the look at the MACD on the 1 hour right here, running up while this thing is coming down. And this thing's running up to cross. And then look at what just happened today on GME. It crosses this motion right here. Now, curiously, and I don't have a comparison for this one, but curiously, this actually looks like the exact same thing. And I thought to myself, that's probably what it was like in May 2024, but I just wouldn't have ever drawn it that way. It would have been too small. But this really looks pretty much exactly like the same thing as well. Like you're seeing that triple peak here, 1, 2, and then 3, where the 2 comes down lower. And that generates like a trend downward, right? And then once this breaks that trend here, as long as it advances and then kind of goes and makes that higher high, it's really the same thing, but on like a micro level. We're really seeing the same exact thing we're seeing here on the big picture. So the question again is like, well, how fast are those iterations going? They're going really fast. If you look at the motions here on these build out, there's that big upthrust. There's the big upthrust, right before the big move in the foretop, it's compressed quite a bit. So the expectation here that I have, this is kind of based on the previous one that I was just kind of illustrating. I don't think there's going to be like a one size fits all for this, but in this case, again, this is like the bigger picture. This is kind of the smaller picture. Again, I don't know if you can see the comparison there between the two, but I would suggest to you that the build outs are roughly equivalent. So you'd have an expectation that this should advance. This is very steep, perhaps, by comparison. I'm not really sure if there's a right or a wrong way to illustrate these angles. I kind of did them slightly differently anyways, but like I'm looking at that bottom and that top, and I'm thinking that this might be right. This is pretty tight, and it looks correct compared to this one. It could be even steeper because technically like this bottom here is quite steep, and that would mean that this is even steeper going from the top. This is like 52 degrees. Probably is exactly where we are today. Yeah, bonking our head right there. So there's like a secondary option, I suppose. This is why I'm like, lines get kind of sloppy, right? Messed up. But you can see that right there. That jumped the one, now it's got to jump the other. This is right there. So the expectation would perhaps be that this pushes out, and at the very least, it has to come higher than this previous top. That would be appropriate because this would be like a big M shape, low. It'd have to come above maybe 24, which is kind of a historic level for us anyways, or just slightly above there. And then the lower option would be that this comes back down and checks again low and kind of does the same thing, although this one would be pretty darn small. It'd have to do something like this. And again, it's like, how far could that go? I mean, realistically, I would not say past another week, because again, this ends around the 23rd outside here. That's really similar to what we see on AMC, where it's like proportionally it should be ending by about the 22nd, 23rd, maybe the 24th if you stretch it out. And that's it. I mean, there's nothing really else to it. If this can make an advancement here, I'll keep it simple as possible, I suppose. It just has to make two advancements, and then I think the iterations would be done unfolding, because this has to be considered like according to its size. So if this were to go down here and then advanced again, and it's a bit tricky to think about what that might look like. It has to get above 24.20. That's not that much to ask for. You're basically talking about a break above 24. With some support here, it's probably going to be going. And interestingly, the levels that I picked out, I went back and I looked. They're all fair value gap levels. Like they're the same fair value gaps that we've had the whole time. One's right here at like 28 area, just slightly above there, and the other's up here at like 35. So that's it, man. Like, if it's going to drop, it's going to do it after some kind of a messy motion right here. And you've really got nothing but just time. Like, you have to wait for it to do its thing. But it's really at the end of what would be considered like a normal pattern. What happens if it starts doing some bigger iteration, Booksy, and just doesn't want to go? I don't know, but you can't dance around and chop through this area forever, you know. And I said earlier, I think if it starts jumping forward like months at a time, because it goes from like here to like the end of November. There's not really a whole lot else to say. If the goal of the operator is just to keep delaying and hitting the delay button, once you kind of pass this window here, that's it. Then it starts like jumping extremely far. You're talking about a month at a time easily. So this is my window. It's already been stretched as far as I can stretch it. I can't keep kicking the can, you know. After that point, a lot of these angles and trajectories, they stop making a lot of sense anyways. You'd have to kind of remap it because it loses, I guess what the right word is, it loses the potency of those connections. Like they go up to 46 pretty easily based on the angles and trajectories here. But it has to make this move out, right? So there's no way to, you can't just keep moving those out. Like that's not going to change ever. So like at some point those angles and trajectories just don't mean anything anymore. And you really can't use them. Like I said, when you do something like this and you know like, hey, this works, right? And you use it and it's effective and you make money off of it and you come to something like a GME or an AMC, it's very frustrating that it just doesn't seem to be going. But then again, that's kind of been the way that this operator has, and these operators, all of them, have been. Like they've just always been that way. And it's frustrating, I know. And I think the idea of like it just rocketing the moon probably feels like a pipe dream. But patience is your friend here. And I think that when you really focus on the details, this is absolutely getting like hyper compressed, you know? So if it's not now within the next week, these signals are just, they don't make any sense to me. There must be some kind of massive something or other between October and November, which I could only imagine would be some kind of a dip, you know? Like if it's not going, I just think it's probably going to be going down into like some kind of a larger spring operation low. I can't imagine it. I don't know why, but it's just, to me, it's like, why would you just keep iterating the same exact thing over and over? I don't know. I mean, maybe the idea is to delay it for rate cuts, delay it till an earnings report, delay it until the warrants, like you name it. But what I'm saying is that the signals themselves are so hyperactive, like compressed, that there's just no like breathing room anymore, you know? You kind of just have to decide. So I don't think it's going to be a big debate for me. I don't think sideways is a huge option. I think that maybe it does happen and it spats in my face, but to me it's like, I think if you don't go up, you're probably going to be dropping into the lows because I don't see this indefinitely moving. It's gotten to this place where it's like compress it one more time and you run out of time. It's like the end of the week, next week. So my kiddo's home. I gotta go. I spent a little bit longer than I wanted to, about an hour on this second stream. But the main purpose of this was to just kind of illustrate that like the bear and the bull targets here are not that complicated. They're pretty straightforward. When you get to this idea of like tracking it to time it, it's always going to be nearly impossible. But I will say that my goal in doing that was really to notice certain changes. And I think that we've seen changes. Like I think it's already shown that. And I think that we're in really in a final stage of where is that bottom going to appear. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like it could already be here, you know, and it's going to seem a little bit ridiculous to some people, but it's totally possible that was even it. I know it sounds silly, but that was even it today. I know. But like, look at this motion right here. This is the motion that we were talking about earlier. Push up once, push up twice, drop back down. Phase B bottom, drop again. I mean, how many more times are you going to have to see that? That's a nested iteration if I've ever seen one. Yeah, man, if you're asking if it's bottomed, I mean, yeah, this whole thing, the last 2 years. If you're asking if it's going to go down again, there's room here for like another. So I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to say it can't go down again. That's silly. There's definitely room here for another, about a week. But I mean, that's a nested iteration if I've ever seen one. And it's there again. It's like all over the place. I'm telling you guys, it's like super small. That's what I'm trying to get across. This is not a. It'd be hilarious if it was going tomorrow and we like called it out. That'd be really funny. Yeah, there's another one right here. I mean, there it is, right? It's there. So that could have been it. It'd be kind of strange. Weird day to do it, right? Wednesday the 15th, but maybe. And there's a macro one of this as well. This is like another one. You guys are like, what? Yeah, this is iterations are nested. So this little shoulder portion, if you want to call it that, is the next iteration. That's how it works. That's why you call it a fractal. This is like built upon itself. Like the pattern of behavior is just repeated everywhere because it's like a snowflake. The pattern's inside the patterns. The pattern builds the pattern on the big picture. So yeah, this is totally like tiny. We might be there. That'd be something else, wouldn't it? Wake up tomorrow and it's like up here at 3:15 and going. I'll tell you what, I don't think I would second guess it if it happened. I'd probably just go with it. I can't believe I'm saying this. It sounds like I'm trying to say it's going to go right this second. It's not unrealistic to say that it could because this is really small. And it did just slightly dip below that marker. But if it goes tomorrow, it'll be like a gap up. And what would have to happen is it probably doesn't need to go below 315 again. It could, but that would be the big back test because it already checked that top. So it might go down as low as like 310 or something, but it wouldn't need to go. I don't think it would need to go all the way back to 295. And frankly, if it started coming down this low, I'd be pretty scared that it would just slide through. So you got to be really careful about this level. I know. Sorry, I won't be able to do that. I'm about to go. I got to make dinner for my kiddo. Yeah, this could be going as soon as tomorrow, which is kind of crazy. Maybe it's setting up into Monday. It's going to compress again or something. Or Tuesday next week, but it looks really small. Sorry. I mean, liquidations are important, but that's just more about liquid capital. So, and then these guys would basically just push up rapidly through each of these creek levels until you get to about 4. That's the only one that I'd be kind of cautious about, at least in the short term. So I don't think it's going to stop before 360. I think that UT has to be there. But I think this one would be maybe the most cautious one at like 4. Now I'm like convincing myself that it's going to go tomorrow, which seems bizarre. Make people feel a lot better. The thing is like GME doesn't look quite, I don't know, man. It did cross up. It did cross that little creek. It really is like right on the, and look at the 1 hour right there. There's certainly room for a drop here if that's the 4 top. But if it doesn't drop, then it's over. If it instead reverses upward, like goes down and then back up. Yeah, I'll try to be, if I can make some time tomorrow. But now I'm like sitting here staring at this, wondering if I can't believe that. But that does look very close. It's not like these time periods were 1-to-1. I don't think. Maybe they were. Let me double check. They couldn't. It could be.